and very warm welcome to each and every one of you. So often we think about what God's will is from our perspective. Do we really know, or do we really can we really find out what his will is? To lead us through this exploration, we have with us our senior yogi sister, Denise Lawrence. It's over to you, Denise.
Hello and Om Shanti. Thank you so much, Madhavi, for that very sweet introduction, and hello to everyone on this webinar. Well, now this is a very important subject. What is God's will and how can we know? Now, as far as I'm aware, all the people who are in this webinar are regular or not so regular students of the Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual University, and therefore know all the background information. So I'm going to be talking about this subject on the basis of that you have all this basic information, and then try to take it further so that we can be clear that it is possible to know what is the will of God, and also to not mix it up between what God says his will is and what people, including many BKs, say his will is, which is actually not his will, but their will. And this is a human frailty. In the enthusiasm of love for God and religious feelings, people think that whatever they think is God's will is actually God's will, or sometimes whatever is to their convenience, they say that is God's will when it's actually their own will. So we need to clarify this. Now, when God is speaking to us, he introduces himself and he says, okay, I am incorporeal Shiva, and I have come to speak to you, and I am talking to you about very specific points. And one of them is, what is my will? And it is compared and contrasted with what the traditional religions claim is God's will. And this is because there is a lot of mixing up or a lot of confusion going on, which has been going on for the last at least 1,000 years. Let us go step by step. So first of all, God introduces himself. And he says, I'm here. It is well known in all the religions through their prayers and their scriptures that a time will come when God comes. And there is a statement that you find in some of the religions, which is that God comes secretly in the night, and that you have to be on the lookout and keep your clothes on. Very intriguing instruction. So the night means the time of darkness. So the time of darkness refers to the time of the end of the time cycle. The beginning of the time cycle is the time of light. And as time goes by, light diminishes. And when half the cycle has completed, then the light is really very dim. And this corresponds with the time when the religions, the conventional, traditional religions emerge. And they make statements about God. And these change over time and become less clear, and there are more variations. When the time cycle reaches its end, there is a situation which in India is called adharma. And adharma is a very interesting expression. It is the opposite of dharma. And we need to take a look at this word first of all. What is dharma? So usually people think the word dharma means religion. And in some cases, there is a case for it. But the actual meaning of dharma is what you are, or what anything is. It's a description of someone or something being what it is. And adharma is if you are not what you are. And so he explains this. And so the first thing that he wants, if you talk about the will of God, the first thing he wants is for people to understand the use of language accurately. Because words exist to refer to certain things, but very often words are changed, or the way they are used is changed, the meaning is changed, and then it becomes the opposite of what it is supposed to be. So that is adharma. And normally people think that God is concerned about human behavior. You have to be good and not bad. You have to be nice and not nasty. You have to be compliant and not rebellious, all this type of thing. Actually, he is not concerned about those things particularly. But people are very concerned about those things. And especially people who are in positions of power and authority and who have to manage people. And what they like is compliance, and they want people to follow instructions and be in order. And so generally speaking, they will make claims to say that God wants you to be like this, and because of that, you have to do what I say. And this is where there is a divergence between what God wants and what people who represent God in one way or the other, what they want. So let us look a little bit more closely as what God says he wants, because it's really very interesting. And obviously, the first thing that he talks about is purity. And so we have to look at what is purity. There are many epithets of God. Epithets are descriptive names. And these descriptive names are useful because they also help us to know what God wants. And these descriptive names have come into being on the basis of two things. One is what people have observed that God does and wants. That means people who observe firsthand. And the other is what God says he wants. And that when he speaks to a number of people all at once. And then that is then replicated and spread. So when God speaks, there are a lot of people who listen firsthand. And when he says that I come at the time of darkness, it is said he comes in the night. And he says, this is my name is Shiva. And I am the father of all souls of all religions. And so you can call me Shiv Baba because you are my children. And that is a familiar term of address between children and their father. And so he also says, you call me the purifier, and I am the purifier. So this is where the question of purity comes in. So we can say clearly that God is very interested that people should become pure. So what is the meaning of become pure? And so different people have different interpretations of this. But what God actually says is, I want you to live your life applying certain principles of purity. So your relationships with each other need to be on the basis of the principle of purity. And the first principle of purity has to do with the idea and the reality that all souls, all people are souls, and all souls are children of God, the Supreme Soul, which means that their relationship is fraternal. And the implication of a fraternal relationship is love and regard. And then all souls also have bodies, and your bodies may be male or female, but the soul itself is genderless. So in the traditional religions, in fact, in science and all the different ways that people consider each other, they will say that a human being is either a male or a female body. And God says, well, that's not true. It looks like that because you are making assessments on the basis of sense perception. So when you look at a human being through your eyes, you see gender. And on the basis of that, there is gender bias. So wherever there is gender bias, there is impurity. And impurity means you see the other as a body and you use them according to the implications of seeing each other as a body, which means there's a reproductive function and there's a social bias, which puts one gender higher than the other in most cases, and particularly in the patriarchal system. So almost all modern human societies are patriarchal and gender biased, and all the religions, the conventional religions, are also patriarchal and gender biased. The ancient religions are not. Very ancient religions tend to be gender blind and sometimes matriarchal as opposed to patriarchal. And they are far more spiritually inclined than the modern religions, which are totally materialistic. And modern religions were put in place about 1,000 years ago. And this is where scriptures were set in stone, and from an oral tradition, it became a written tradition. And then the religious authorities were exclusively males. And so the description of God's will, according to them, was whatever was convenient for them. And so they claim that gender bias is also God's will. And you can see this in the very famous story of Adam and Eve, which is the foundation of the justification for gender bias in the Abrahamic traditions. And there are similar stories in Hinduism. In Buddhism, it's a non-theistic religion, and so there is no question of God or God's will. They are more focused on the knowledge of karma. And then that also means that all the religions are concerned about behavior, and because they're patriarchal and gender biased, the behavior of men and women, boys and girls, is in order to maintain the status quo of a gender biased social system. And so when God comes, he says, no, that is not a very good way to organize society, because it results in suffering, and it causes a lot of negative karma. So when he talks about he wants purity, he's talking about a gender-blind, more egalitarian approach to each other as human beings. And so one of the things he wants is for people to look at each other with a fraternal eye. And in Hindi, we use this expression, or he uses this expression, bhai bhai ki drishti. So the way that you look through your eyes is your perspective, and the consciousness with which you look through your eyes determines your perception. So perspective and perception are important words to think about. So your perspective is that you see the physical, but you also know that behind the physical, there is the spiritual. And so in your perception, you give higher priority to perceiving what is invisible in comparison with what is visible. And you do not forget to maintain that priority. So this is called purity. And so it means, if you extend it further, that you do not look at a person and evaluate a person according to gender, race, religious orientation or background, sexual orientation, color, social position, whether they're rich or poor, whether they're educated or not educated, but you actually go right past those things which are, from his point of view, deceptive, because they don't prove or disprove about the character of a person. And he says you must look at another person, perceive the soul behind the physical appearance, and interact with that being as your spiritual brother. And bearing in mind that we all have bodies in social interaction, your relationship is brother and sister, which means that you do not look at another person as an object that you can use for your pleasure or convenience. If you do that with another human being, that is called impurity. And that means that the way that you interact with that person will be, by definition, impure, and it will be negative karma. And of course, most people, most of the time, for the past, according to the cycle, 2,500 years, have been clocking up a lot of negative karma. And this negative karma takes the form of a debt. And he also tells us that what he wants is for us to remove that debt. And removing that debt can be done in various ways. The best way, what he recommends, is remove that debt through yoga. So how do you do that? First, we have to take a look at this debt, this karmic debt, and how he calls it a weight. So when anything is weighted, it means that it is oriented to move in a particular direction. This is the meaning of weighted. So on your head, that means your intelligence. On your head, there is a weight that is there because of a long, long period of negative karma, which you did not consider to be negative, because the prevailing social attitudes and the teachings that you get in conventional religions tells you that this kind of perception that's gender biased, race biased, culture biased, religion biased is correct. And so you don't think that it's wrong. And then God comes and he says, no, it's not correct. It's dharma. It's because you are thinking that you are something that you are not, that you are thinking others are something that they are not. And consequently, your karma, even though you believe it's very good, is actually very bad. And it puts you in trouble. It makes you suffer. And it causes you to reincarnate in progressively unpleasant and difficult conditions until the world as a whole becomes something that he says, this is what you call hell. And you have created it because you have done a lot of negative karma, knowing it's negative, but doing it anyway. And you've done a lot of other negative karma thinking that it's positive. So you've got a lot more debt than you think or than you calculated. So he comes and he establishes a school so he can teach people about these things. And that means what he wants is for people to rethink the accepted truths that they have been living according to for many generations. That means many incarnations. So this is a very important aspect of what he wants. Let me take you now to another aspect of what he wants. One of the epithets of God and one of the words that is given in different religions about God is God is truth. God is the knower of truth. And so he is also called Somnat, which means the giver of the nectar of knowledge. He is called the giver of salvation. He is called the one who gives the third eye. So all of these are to do with information about himself. And we use the word him because in the English language, the word he covers males and females. And of course, God is not having any gender. God says, I am the Supreme Soul, I am your father, and I am your mother. So I am male and female, not because of any biological considerations, but because of my relationship with you. So what is the implication of the relationship of mother and father? So your mother is the one through whom you get born. Your mother is the one who cares for you and who nurtures and sustains you and who prepares you for life in a very personal way. Your father is the one who gives you your identity and who prepares you for life in a social way, in a professional way, and who takes responsibility for your education and preparing you to stand on your feet in the social environment. And also your father gives you an inheritance. So he says, I have come to give you an inheritance, and the inheritance is my property. So what is the property of God? He says, I am the one who knows about the creator and the creation. So this is a very important expression because in India, not in the other religious traditions, so this is just in India, which is the most ancient of all the traditions, and which, according to God, all the other religious traditions derive from the concepts that are first to be found in India. So in India, it is said, no one knows the knowledge of the Creator and the creation. This is a very important and quite well-known statement. And he says, yes, you're right. None of you know about me, the Creator, and you also do not know about the beginning, continuation, and end of the world cycle. That is the cycle of history and geography of the world in any given time cycle. So he says, I know this information, and what I want is for you to claim this knowledge. And that is the inheritance that I offer to you, but you will receive it to the extent that you claim it. And so because of that, he has to be the teacher. And the teacher is the one who sets up a university where people are invited to come and study. So he says the main influences of any human being in terms of how they think and what their perspective and perception of life is. So the main influences are their father, their teacher, and then thirdly, the guru. And so he says, I am the father of all, the teacher of all, and the guru of all. And so I want you to come into relationship with me as your father, as your teacher, and as your guru. And so I will explain to you how to do that. And it's a very, very subtle process. And in order to fully become this and fully understand this and consequently fully claim your inheritance, you need to engage in this study and this relationship for your whole life. That means the rest of your life, from the time when you have your encounter with God. And this process is transformational, because very slowly and gradually, by continuously interacting with you and talking with you, God brings you slowly back to your original condition. And this is called creation. A lot of people think that creation is God says, let there be light, and the sun got switched on, and let there be man, and a man came along, and let there be woman, and a woman came along. That is not what is meant by creation. Because he says, look, your souls, and souls are immortal and indestructible, so there is no possibility of a soul coming into existence. So another thing that he wants is for his students to be able to understand information about beings who have always existed. And that requires circular thinking. And people think of themselves as physical bodies with a birth date and a death date and a little line in between on the tombstone, which is their life. And that's linear thinking. And so the materialistic world that we live in and the materialistic religions that we are part of are all materialistic from the angle of God. And materialism means linear thinking. And he says, I'm going to teach you how to think in a circular way, because this is going to make it possible for you to grasp and understand that you are actually eternal, immortal souls who have no beginning and no end, but who nevertheless deteriorate while proceeding through the cycle of death and rebirth in the time cycle. And at the end of the time cycle, he comes to bring you back to your original condition, which means purification through yoga or any of the other means. And it also means that you gradually come to understand what he says is his truth, his knowledge, but it's very subtle, it's very different from human ideas. And so it takes a long, long time to shift from what he calls bhakti to gyan. So he says that it is there in the scriptures that a time will come, which is the time of adharma, and I explained to you what adharma was, and that he will destroy adharma and in its place establish dharma. And so what he wants is for people to gradually become less and less adharma and more according to dharma. So this is a process of change of consciousness. And he talks about it as a change from body consciousness, which is materialism, to soul consciousness, which is spirituality. So materialism means I am a physical body, which is an object. And spirituality is I am a spiritual being, a soul, and I take and leave a series of physical bodies, which are the mediums through which I interact with other people in the context of life on earth as a human being. So this is not known to anyone else. This is not known in the religions. They know bits and pieces, and then they interpret different symbols, different ancient memories according to how they feel. And so you get a wide variety of different ideas, which sometimes clash with each other, sometimes get along with each other. But what he wants is for people to avail themselves of his offer to teach them about the knowledge of the Creator and the creation, so that they can claim what is called the fortune of the kingdom of the world. And that is a very high destination. One of the things that you see in world history is different individuals tried to become rulers of the world through the use of war, invasion, and the subjugation of other people. And some of them came fairly close to it, but all the time it involved a lot of oppression of others, a lot of negative karma, a lot of violence, and eventually it failed. And so that is also part of the process of the accumulation of negative karma, and it creates an aspect of the weight. So the weight of this negative karma compels you to continue in that direction. Even if you want to go in another direction, that weight is much more heavy or strong than your personal will. So one of the things that he says is, I am teaching you and giving you information and teaching you how to take power from me so that you can get willpower, which is as strong, if not stronger, than the weight of your negative karma. So when you gradually acquire this, slowly you neutralize the effect of negative karma, which is usually described as the destruction of negative karma. And a lot of people understand these things in a very physical way because they're used to thinking about things in a physical way. And so this is why it takes so much time for a BK to understand Gyan and yoga in the way that Shiv Baba intends it. And that's just the way it is, because to go from materialist to spiritual, you can do that easily in a nice talk, but to do it in reality is another story altogether. And so it takes time. And a lot of times people think that if you feel spiritual, it means you are spiritual. But that is also deceptive, because feelings are part of sense perception. And so a time comes in your meditation practice of Raj Yoga that you realize this, and then you move beyond trying to evaluate your stage on the basis of how you feel. Obviously, this is a long, long process, and we are going through this slowly, step by step. Although this is called easy Raj Yoga, it's not that easy. It's easy when you know how, you can say. It's easy when you're already there, yes, but getting there is not so easy. And so he also wants us to be patient with ourselves and patient with each other. So this is another thing that we can add to the list of what is God's will. We have to be patient, we have to be tolerant, we have to understand that not everyone will understand this, not everyone will appreciate it. In fact, everyone understands and appreciates it according to who they are, according to the kind of effort they have made to understand it. And he also warns us that you are not in a position to judge and evaluate each other, because you have a tendency to evaluate and judge each other according to materialistic criteria, or according to the criteria that are part of your cultural and religious background. And all of these things are actually unreliable. And so you need to be careful about that. So what else does he want? One thing that comes through in all the Murlis pretty much is that he wants people to understand who he is and what he is. And he says, right from the beginning, very, very few of you understand me or know me, who I am and what I am and as I am. So in spite of that, again and again, he continues to describe and define himself. And this is done in the context of the prevailing ideas of Hinduism in modern India. And all of these are very much taking up the question of God being omnipresent. So one of the things that he really wants is for it to be made known, you have to know it and you have to make others know it, that God is not omnipresent. And this is a very big thing that he talks about a great deal. So that means if we want to clarify what he wants, we need to take up this matter very clearly. So he says, people think I am omnipresent. So which people think that? This basically comes from the teachings of Shankaracharya, who took birth in India about 1500 years in the past, and who changed the scripture, which is called the Gita, who changed all the scriptures of India systematically, together with a group of scholars. And this became known as Vedic India. So the scriptures called the Vedas, there are 4 Vedas, this is where you get this concept of omnipresence. And the idea of omnipresence is based on the spiritual experiences of Shankaracharya and others who were part of his gathering. And they experienced in their meditations that they could connect with an energy that was everywhere. And they said, that is God. And God says, no, it's not. What you're connecting with when you do that is the energy of matter. And the energy of matter is, in fact, everywhere in the material world. And the energy of matter is not something that you can perceive directly with your senses, but the energy of matter is something that you can perceive when you go into a subtle state of meditation. And it's a very powerful energy. It's a very powerful experience. And so obviously they could be forgiven for assuming that that is God and that they discovered it. And so they built this whole reformed version of Hinduism around this. And from God's perspective, which he says when he comes at the end of the time cycle, is that they have actually misled people and turned their attention away from the actual being of God, and that because of that, they lost purity, they lost understanding, they lost wisdom, they lost energy, and the state of the world became really bad. And so he wants it to be known that he is not omnipresent. So if he's not omnipresent, then where is he? So he wants us to know who he is, where he is, and what he does. And when does he do what he does that he is famous for? So what is God famous for is establishing heaven. And if God is everywhere, then presumably it should be heaven everywhere, but it isn't. And so there are many points that Baba gives in all the Murlis to show clearly that this idea of omnipresence causes people to think about God in a way that from his angle is defamatory. And that also that when people think of God as omnipresent, it's not possible to focus on God. It's not possible to meditate in the sense of think deeply about what he is and make connection with God. All of those things are destroyed by this concept of omnipresence. So this is a very, very important thing that he wants. So when you are presented with the Murlis and asked to study the Murlis, one of the ways in which you can do this is to isolate all the different arguments he gives for why he is not omnipresent, because he wants us to represent him in this aspect and be able to argue his case for him and prove to people who think otherwise that actually God is not omnipresent. And so very few people are able to do that, but nevertheless, this is something he wants. So it's very important to take a look at all those points. And so when you're studying the Murli, different people study it in different ways. But one of the things you can do is to give yourself a little project to isolate these different points and prepare a case for proving that God is somewhere and not everywhere. So where is that somewhere? So the somewhere is called the world of light, or nirvana. Now, according to the Vedantic concepts, they take a expression which is very well known in India, and the expression is that the world is false and Maya is false. Whatever is not the material world is true. And so what they concluded is that this energy, this, what he has told us is the energy of matter, is also nirvana, because they could connect with this energy of matter in their meditation, and they concluded that this is nirvana because it's an energy which is light. Now, nirvana is the world of light, which is non-material and which you cannot go to. According to God, you cannot have access to that unless he personally puts you there. So all the people in the path of Vedantic Hinduism and a few other religions who are trying to go to the light, they are assuming that that is nirvana. And he says no. But what happens when you leave the body is, and when you have a very strong experiences of meditation, is you go to what is called the subtle regions and you experience light there. Now, Shiva is classified in the descriptions as the knower of the three worlds. And so different religious people have said, okay, the three worlds is heaven is up above and hell is down below, and then here we are on earth. So they think the three worlds are heaven, hell, and the earth as we know it. And you see that in some different poems and religious descriptions. But he says, no, that is not what it is. And it is not possible for a human being to discover it, because a human being is only able to experience matter, whether it's gross matter or subtle matter. So the subtle world corresponds to dreams, it corresponds to other kind of energies that different healers make contact with. So this is subtle matter, subtle energy. Or the etheric body. You have a physical body, you have an etheric body, a subtle body, and then there is the soul. And the soul is absolutely non-material, and the world of nirvana is non-material, which means it cannot be perceived. You can understand it, you can conceptualize it, if your mind is developed to that extent, but you cannot perceive it. And so people who are in body consciousness are of the opinion that they can distinguish between gross matter and subtle matter, and they conclude that subtle matter is the same as the spirit, and gross matter is matter. And Shiv Baba says, no, there is gross matter, subtle matter, and then there is non-matter. And he's the only one who knows about it. And he says, I live in the world of non-matter, and I am not a human soul. I am the only soul who is able to be aware of the region of non-matter while being there, and any souls who are there are unaware. They exist. They are there before they arrive on the earth, but they cannot return to nirvana until the end of the cycle, and they can only return there when he takes them there. So this is absolutely contrary to the conclusions of all the prophet souls and the people of the Shankaracharya dynasty, the Vedantic people. And so this is a very, very big difference between what a human being can come up with and what God knows. And at the end of the cycle, he says, okay, you are really interested to find out these things, and the only source of this information is me. And I am very interested in explaining all this to you, but it takes time to understand it and study it. And you need to lead a pure life in order to reach this level of subtlety, to be able to grasp it and to be able to take power from me and gradually restore yourselves to your original condition, which is called Sato Pradhan, absolute purity. So this is quite a big thing. And so we may hear the words, but hearing the words is not enough. We have to work with it constantly, continuously, over a long, long period of time, so that that shift can take effect, that actually moves us from Tamo Pradhan to Sato Pradhan. Now I can see that there are tons of questions coming up in the chat, but I'm going to take up those afterwards at the time when we have our discussion in the second part of this webinar. So this is quite subtle, this is quite complex, and I don't think it can be completely taken and all of its details in just one session, but at least we can open up the subject. Now, let's look at some more of what God wants, because this is our subject. What is the will of God? Another thing he wants us to achieve is the ability to get through the transition between the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next cycle, which is a very, very great disturbance in the material world and in the psychological world, the mental world of all people. And as we speak, we are seeing in the media that there's a great deal of war happening in different parts of the world. And some of it is a recently started war, and so it's all over the media. And then people are seeing scenes of a lot of suffering a lot of violence, a lot of destruction, terrible things going on. People are also watching a lot of disturbances in nature and looking at it in the angle of climate change and wanting to control it. And so what he's saying is that actually these wars, this climate change, pandemics, and other very severe circumstances are going to be intensifying, and it's not possible to stop it or control it, because it's what happens when one cycle finishes and another cycle begins. And what he wants is for us to be able to navigate these times and get through it without getting traumatized, because these are very, very traumatic circumstances. And he says, look, I am here with you at this time because you really need me. You really need my power. You need me to be with you. And so I want you to become so capable of being with me and holding on to me. And I want you to acquire a perspective on the collapse of the world as we know it, as it shifts from one cycle to another. So on the one hand, the old cycle and all the things to do with it are collapsing, and on the other hand, a new cycle is coming into being, and we are in a transition period, which he calls the confluence age. So what he wants is for us to understand what's going on in the confluence age and to take instruction from him so that we can navigate this very turbulent time and take full advantage of what is coming and also let go of what is going. And this requires attention on our part, practice, study, and a willingness to take the risk that what he's saying is true and that it's extremely valuable. And all of that depends on us recognizing him, knowing him as he is, what he is, who he is. And then how do you do that? So what he says is, well, those of you who are what we can call ancient souls, you have been around for a long time, and you were on the earth in the early days of the cycle. So you have experience of the golden age and the silver age and the copper age and the iron age. So this experience is deep down in your subconscious memories. And so when I talk to you about it, these memories get awakened, and that helps you to recognize me. So what he wants is for us to recognize that he is who he says he is, and that ideas that we have had about God are basically man-made and not true. And so we have to gradually drop those and gradually take on what he's telling us. And it's a very gradual process, because we have to verify it for ourselves. We have to get used to it. We have to try it out and try to evaluate it intellectually, in terms of our mind, many different ways. This is not so easy, and it takes time. So we have to give ourselves the time to do that. And he says, this, what I am telling you, is most accessible to people who have been in pursuit of truth. Truth, someone was asking, what is truth? How do you define truth? I think different people define it for themselves, but there is this urge in certain souls that they're looking for truth. They don't know what they mean by that, but it comes in their minds. I want to know truth. I want to find the truth. I want to make contact with truth. And when I get it, I will know it. Something like that. So again, it is quite subjective. It's quite personal. We tend to think about truth as an objective thing that is provable by the usual rules of science, but here he's talking about something much, much more subtle than that. And I think he's also saying that the subjective is actually more reliable than the objective. And so, well, if you want to shift from relying on objective truth to subjective truth, that's a big, long process. So this is again and again, I'm saying it takes time to go through the changes because they're incremental, they're slow, and they take time to get consolidated within us. It's not just an intellectual process. The intellectual process is important, but to consolidate it, to become it, that is more in the mind, and that takes time. So we have to have a different relationship with death, our own death, other people's death. We have to have a different relationship with human suffering, our own suffering, other people's suffering. And so he wants us to practice to the point where we are not traumatized by physical experiences. That means suffering that we experience or suffering that we see happening to somebody else. Because as long as you take in those sense perceptions, you will be traumatized. And so one of the things he wants from us, I think maybe I'll put this as the last thing to say, that what he wants us to not take sorrow. And then he describes what he means by that. And it's not actually sorrow only, but he wants us to not allow the perception of human suffering, whether it's your own suffering or you observe somebody giving suffering to somebody else or you observe someone else suffering. He wants us not to let that touch our soul. And that is a very, very difficult thing because the body conscious soul is completely under the influence of sense perception. So in order to not take sorrow, you have to first of all think about it. What does that mean? Meditate on it. Because the soul has been taking sorrow for thousands of years. And so it's a very, very deep sanskar. And a lot of sorrow has gone in. And all of that has to be neutralized and removed. So that's a very big thing. And these are very subtle things. And everyone who hears even what I'm saying or what they see in the Murlis will interpret it their way. It's not something that happens the same for everybody. It's not like that at all. It's really very, very subjective. So I will stop there. And maybe I must have opened up a lot of questions, but let's take it from there. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti, Denise. It has been so wonderful. Do you know what? I couldn't even move from here, you know? Thank you so much. Over to you, Denise, for the final meditation.
Om Shanti. Well, we've had so many big questions arising, and I was talking about quite complicated things, but in the end, just turn the attention deep within and know the self as a point of light. Consider the self, this eternal, immortal being, so subtle, so extraordinary, and know the Supreme Father, the Supreme Soul, very subtle, very extraordinary, and that there is an eternal connection between I, the soul, and this one, the Supreme One, the ocean of love, who is with me always. Be still, be gentle, be quiet with the self, and know that Baba, incorporeal God, is with me.